Friends, have you noticed anything going on in the U.S. Congress lately? Anti Semitism, the Jihad caucus, the Hamas caucus, pro Islamist supremacy, pro Sharia supremacy. That's what's going on in the United States Congress. And tonight, we'll be talking about why Sharia supremacy is a threat to the United States of America. So strap in. This is the Rob Mena Show. Every day, we see and hear something from the new so-called Jihad caucus in the 116th Congress of the United States. Whether it's an Allah Akbar tweet from Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, or a clear statement for support of Palestinian terrorists from Michigan's Rashida Tlaib, Sharia supremacy concepts and anti-Semitism have clearly established a foothold in the federal government's legislative body. Many Americans see this as a religious freedom issue and are reluctant to take the issues these viewpoints present in our nation's post 9/11 world. But does being a Muslim mean you can't be a loyal U.S. citizen dedicated to the values that made America free? Or is it something else, something not religious, but ideological, and a different form of government that is the problem? The importance of identifying the influence methods and operations of those from the Muslim faith who pursue Sharia supremacy can't be more clear or urgent than it is today, right here in 21st century America. Our values of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom to peacefully assemble are fundamental liberties, not only written into the Bill of Rights, but are also naturally occurring rights for all human beings, untouchable by governments. This idea is why our founders worked so hard to design a constitution that could and does stand the test of time and changing cultures if adhered to. Our responsibility to protect these rights doesn't just fall to the government, but to all of us. That's the crucial reason why we as a people must identify Islamist Sharia supremacy activities clearly and communicate about them as ideological activities that are not compatible with the very idea of the United States of America, liberty. We national policy experienced citizens have spent a lot of time defending this nation. So I want this show to help us answer three key questions about Sharia supremacy. First, what is Sharia supremacy? Second, is it effort by the U.S. to identify Sharia supremacy, influence operations, develop defensive safeguards, and implement those safeguards unconstitutional or a violation of civil rights? And third, what is the threat to American culture and our liberties as we know them? Our special guest today will help us answer these key questions and much more. Mr. Frank Gaffney is the founder and executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., a not-for-profit, nonpartisan educational corporation established in 1988. Under Mr. Gaffney's leadership, the center has been nationally and internationally recognized as a resource for timely and informed and appropriate penetrating analysis of foreign and defense policy matters. Mr. Gaffney is also the host of Secure Freedom Radio, a nationally syndicated program heard weeknights around and throughout the country. And if that wasn't enough credentials, Mr. Gaffney is an author of the highly acclaimed Sharia, The Threat to America, and the publisher of over a dozen other books and monographs from the center. And if that wasn't enough credentials, Mr. Gaffney also served as President Ronald Reagan's Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy, among other highly distinguished roles he's filled developing and implementing national security policy. Mr. Gaffney, thanks for coming on.
Oh, pleasure is mine. Rob, thanks so much for not only having me, but having this as the topic that we're going to discuss, because it's absolutely imperative that more people understand what we're grappling with, and there's a lot of evidence of it that we can explore, and I'm pleased to be able to do it with you.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure to do it for our audience, and hopefully this goes far and wide. to the American public, because I think citizens are really concerned about. Well, they're concerned about religious freedom. You know, Islam, Muslims are a religion. But I wanted to bring you on to talk about Sharia supremacy, the Sharia law part of Islamism is what I call it. The Islamists that attack us all the time and hate the West and those kind of things, so that we can understand how it's not an easy thing to do, but it's the proper thing to do to take Sharia supremacy and Sharia law and look at that from an ideological perspective instead of a religious perspective, without saying, you know, if you're a Muslim, you can't be a good American, because I don't believe that's true. So let's dive right into it. Can you define it for the viewers? You know, what is Sharia law supremacy, and why is it important for us to know that?
Sure. Sharia is a term that the Muslims use to describe a complete path, as they've seen it derived from the Quran, the stories of Muhammad's life, his experiences, his sayings, and the like, the sacred texts, in other words, of Islam. And what it represents is, as you say, not simply sort of direction with respect to individual Muslims' pietistic practice, you know, how many times you pray and which direction you face when you do and what you say, and all. But rather, that may be 10% of the body of Sharia. The rest of it is basically about power, about who has it, who gets it, what you do to keep it, what you do to acquire it, and how you employ it to advance the goal of imposing this program of Sharia worldwide. And what makes this, in other words, a supremacist doctrine is that it is absolutely baked into Sharia, that Allah, the God of Islam, is directing its adherents, the faithful Muslim, as the authorities of Islam say, to engage in jihad, to achieve the triumph of Sharia. And I don't use the word Sharia law because it's more than law. It's really a political, military, and legal program that governs, as I say, all aspects of the faithful Muslim's life. And to the extent that they believe that using violence where they can, or using sort of stealthy techniques, sedition, subversion, financial operations, influence operations, what has been called by the Muslim Brotherhood civilization jihad. Either way, it's designed to seek the complete submission of both Muslims and non-Muslims worldwide to this program. And it sounds unbelievable. It sounds preposterous, perhaps, but that is the goal. And the conviction of the folks who embrace it is that they will win. They will triumph because it is Allah's will that they do so. So this is what makes it, I think, what Ronald Reagan used to call the existential threat of our time. Because whether it's the jihadists, the terrorists, if you will, of the violent kind, or whether it's the subversive Muslim Brotherhood, who are operating, by the way, and have been now for over half a century in our own country using civilization, stealthy, subversive techniques, we are facing a determined adversary who believes that they will displace and ultimately defeat our constitutional republic with, all the freedoms that we've taken for granted for so long. And that's what makes it an existential threat, Rob.
So it's not, just so I understand, Sharia supremacy is not about just practicing one's religion and faith and maybe converting a few people every once in a while, or converting a lot of people, but practicing that faith and leaving others alone that deny that faith or have other strong faith that are not going to ever convert. It's more than that. I mean, it's about developing a force, a legal regime, a regime that of ideological effort, a military regime,
Even
and a
economic, Sharia
geopolitical regime of
compliant
government.
finance. Yeah,
Exactly. So, in a financial system that forces Islam onto a population. That's the way I understand it. Uh, so, is there a way? Because I have Muslim friends, I've fought alongside Muslims and served alongside Muslims, both American and around the world, especially in the Middle East, all of my military career. And I would trust especially the ones that I fought alongside and planned wars and helped defend our country and our beliefs, our American values and beliefs. I would trust them more or as much as my own brother or
yeah.
sister. So how do we? Because we, people like you and me, we get attacked all the time by today's elite, whatever you want to call them, in the media, politicians, CARE. You mentioned CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
But we get attacked all
Council
the
on American
time
Islamic
for,
Relations, right?
yeah, we get attacked all the time for trying to say, look, you can be a Muslim in the United States of America and practice the Muslim faith, but you cannot practice Sharia supremacy because it's not compatible with the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
That's my view. Is that an accurate view from your
Yeah,
perspective?
I think it's a completely accurate view, and it's an important point to make right up front. There are lots of Muslims, I think, particularly in the United States, who don't want to live under this brutally repressive program. And I mean, when you think about it, it calls for killing homosexuals. It calls for killing Jews. It calls for the brutalization of women. It is, as I say, supremacist, so that if you want to practice some other faith, at best you're reduced to sort of a second or third class citizen, some would say enslaved. And at worst, you're killed because they don't approve of your religion. So, I mean, this is a barbaric civilization ending program. And a lot of Muslims around the world, and again, I think a lot of Muslims who came to this country to get away from it where they started, don't want to live under Sharia, don't want to be subjected to it themselves, and certainly don't want to impose it on anybody else. That's the best hope we have, I believe, for staving off and ultimately defeating this latest version. And that's, I think of it as Nazism or communism with a god. It's just another totalitarian ideology, Rob. But when you confront it, if you can have, as you say, Muslims who share our desire to live in freedom, who believe that the Constitution of the United States and the democratic form of government that it permits, the republic that we have, is preferable to the so-called, God-ordained program of Sharia. Well, those are our natural allies and can be very important in this fight, not least because they can speak to other Muslims who may feel the same way they do, but who are otherwise being induced to believe they have to go along with this Sharia program. They have to be part of the jihad and impose it on all the rest of us. So I personally believe it is critical that we make this distinction. And one of my greatest frustrations, I have to say, having spent a lot of time on this, as you have, is we have for so long been under the spell, I guess you might call it, certainly under the tutelage of the Muslim Brotherhood, to believe that they're the Muslims that we have to deal with. They're the only ones who speak for the faith. They're the ones who will be able to help us, stave off the terrorists. They're part of the problem. And if we continue to rely on them, we're not going to be able to enlist the Muslims who want freedom and want to support this country and help it prevail over our mutual enemy, the Sharia supremacists.
Yeah. Yeah, Frank, and that leads me to my second big question, and we've touched on it already, because you can't have a discussion about this without talking about the impacts on American culture and the impacts on American liberty, which is the founding value of the United States of America. But it's not lost on me, and it's not lost on my viewers and many, many millions of Americans. The new Congress, the 116th Congress, that's out, and Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, and Representative Rashida Tlaib from Michigan are now in the Congress, and they're Muslim women, and they're not the first Muslims in the U.S. Congress, but they are the first to appear to be advocating for adherence to Sharia supremacy. One of the first issues that was not settled correctly, in my view, by the Congress itself was the wearing of the hijab by Representative Omar and her request to change the rules. When you've had many, many religious people of faith serve in the Congress that have headgear as part of their faith, that rule has never been changed for. I'm very concerned, even though it seems a small thing, but it's a major issue. And then we get into the anti-Semitic comments. Now Omar's been had to apologize once, and the latest soft shoe resolution where the Democratic Party couldn't call her out for being for anti-Semitic views and comments that she's made. Specifically, they had to put a whole bunch of other stuff in there and make it all soft and not even name her by name. When on the other hand, the Republicans, when we had Representative Steve King, who was just portrayed as having, that's his defense from himself, portrayed as having made racist and
by the New York Times,
potentially white supremacists. He was removed from committees. He was called out by name by his party on the floor of the House of Representatives. But we can't address anti-Semitism, not to mention, we didn't even mention Sharia supremacy and the issues that those are, that presents to the American people with these two women in the U.S. Congress, because they are both in their own ways pro-Sharia. And Ms. Tlaib is very pro-Hamas and won't call out and oppose payments by the Palestinian Authority to terrorist families that go out and do suicide bombings and all kinds of other attacks to try to kill Israelis. So how do we, the people of the United States are concerned, I believe, and I believe this is not just Christians and Jews. I believe Muslims that believe in the United States are concerned too, even though you may not hear from them that much publicly. Because these two women are the ones that end up being into the U.S. Congress first, and they're backed by CARE. You've seen CARE individuals and even a Hamas individual, I believe, walk in the halls of Congress, going into their offices, being nasty to reporters and blocking them and those kinds of things, and even blocking citizens from getting into the doors of the offices to their Congress. I saw just the other day on national television. So it's a threat. We know, you and I know it's a threat, but what can the average citizen, and what should the average citizen do to make sure that we nip it in the bud, so to speak, and we put as much opposition in somebody's religion? It's a big question.
It is a big question, and there are a couple of things you said. A lot of things I'd like to respond to, but in the shortness of time, let me simply say, I think that what we must first of all do is understand that what we're dealing with here is not a religion. Sharia, yes, it has a patina of religiosity to it, as I said, but fundamentally it is another totalitarian, political, military, legal doctrine, ideology, if you will, that is antithetical, as you said, to our Constitution. And as opposed to treating it as a religion and therefore thinking that we must protect it, even though it is toxic to our very republic's survival, if we think about it as a hostile, anti-constitutional doctrine, like those in the past, Nazism, fascism, communism, then we have laws on the books, Rob, to protect us against it. And I think those need to be implemented. You mentioned the hijab and this woman, Ilhan Omar. What was wrong with that decision was not simply that it changed the longstanding rules of the House, but that we failed to understand that it was perceived by her and the Muslim Brotherhood, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Islamic Society of North America, and all these others, that Islamic Relief, people that she hangs with and raises funds for example, as an act of submission by the United States Congress to this new force in its midst. And I don't think there's any doubt at all that her subsequent conduct, her aggressive anti-Semitic statements, her non-apologies apologies, and her doubling down is all further evidence that she believes we're going to continue to submit. And as you said, Rob, that resolution further reinforced that conviction, I'm quite sure. When you watch what this kind of civilization jihad entails, it is very much this sort of thing. Salami slices, asking for accommodations, or increasingly demanding accommodations. So to your question, what should individual Americans do? In the face of now this unmistakable evidence that when you make these accommodations, you simply get more aggressive behavior, more unacceptably hostile behavior. And maybe it's not quite violent yet, but that's the trajectory we're on. Look at Europe. Don't take my word for it. Look at how this is building in Europe. The anti-Semitism is just one manifestation of it, but increasingly, no-go zones in cities across Europe where the authorities fear to enter. Accommodations being made by the governments to wear the hijab or take over the streets during prayer time or in any other way. It feeds on itself, and I think, first of all, I would say to Americans, you need to understand what we're up against. Not all Muslims, I would say not Islam itself, but certainly what the authorities of the faith say is the true Islam, namely Sharia, this doctrine at its core. And to the extent that we are confronting it, we must not accommodate it. We must oppose it, because at the end of the day, our very republic, our Constitution, our freedoms, our lives, I believe, are on the line. And that requires, I think, leadership. And what's particularly painful to me is that some of the best people who have provided that leadership in the past have been viciously attacked, as you and I have been, for speaking truthfully about these matters. Not as haters, not as bigots, not as racists, not as Islamophobes, which is a made-up term, but speaking authoritatively about some of the truths that are in play here. And if we don't understand them, and if we don't address them properly, I fear that we will go the way of Europe, which is fairly far down the tubes in terms of having Muslims in place who are imposing Sharia and having the native populations increasingly powerless to resist. We mustn't allow that to happen in this country. I pray we won't, and I thank you for your efforts and leadership in standing up against it.
Well, thank you, Frank, and I agree. There are small pockets in our country already where I believe we're starting to see some of these even more, I would call it egregious efforts to get even stronger on Sharia in whole communities, towns, and those kinds of things. So we must push back on these types of things and not accommodate it. I think the mayor of the small town out in Texas, in between Fort Worth and Dallas there, when she pushed back on the request to have Sharia law at the hearings,
a separate tribunal to adjudicate Sharia cases under
exactly right.
Under
that is one of the things that shows exactly what you're talking about. It proves your case that if you don't accommodate it, then you don't see the next step. And unfortunately for the Congress, I think we've already seen the next step. Omar put out a press release praising the Congress for calling out Islamophobia for the first time ever and touting it as a great victory in her, I call them the Jihad Caucus, and I don't mean that in a nice way. The Jihad Caucus has been taking that on and CAIR, CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, also put out a press release along the same lines. So we've got to not accommodate it. We've got to fight for what's right in our Constitution of the United States. And I really do thank you for coming on, and our viewers will get a lot out of this, and we really appreciate your time.
May I just give them a website for a resource on this?
Absolutely.
SecureFreedom.org has got a wealth of information on all of these subjects. Another, I think, very powerful one is counterjihad.com.
There you have it, folks. Mr. Frank Gaffney, the chairman of the Center for Security Policy, has been with us, and we greatly appreciate his information and experience in these matters so that we can help the American people understand what the way they need to be thinking about it and the actions that the individual citizen can take to protect our country and its future. This is the Rob Maness Show. Well, friends, thank you for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate Mr. Frank Gaffney leading us through the answers to the questions of what Sharia supremacy is, why it's important for us as citizens and as a nation to protect our Constitution and the future of the United States of America against the ideological portion of Islam, and that is Sharia supremacy, not the religion of Muslims. So let's hang together, keep doing a great job, and make sure that we protect our children's future here in the United States of America. That's it for us tonight. Until next week, I'm Rob Maness.